What's the most reckless thing a school nurse has ever done to a student? Watched a kid almost die from anaphylaxis while hiding the EpiPen. Let me back up. My 8-year-old daughter Mia has a severe peanut allergy, on file with the school since kindergarten. It's on her file, on her locker, and the front office has 2 EpiPens with her name on them. Last Tuesday, a kid in her 3rd grade class brought trail mix to share during silent reading, and within minutes Mia's lips started swelling and her throat began closing. She did exactly what we'd practiced 100 times. She walked straight to the nurse's office, holding her own EpiPen from her backpack, and asked for help. The nurse, Mrs. Doyle, looked her up and down and said, "You have a math test next period, don't you, Mia?" Mia, struggling to breathe, just nodded. Mrs. Doyle smiled and took the EpiPen out of her hand. "Honey, I've been a nurse for over 20 years. I know test nerves when I see them. Sit down. We'll see how you feel in a few minutes." Mia tried to explain about the trail mix, but the words came out wheezy and broken. Mrs. Doyle pointed to a cot. "You're not getting out of that test by coming in here." Mia sat. She started crying, which made the breathing worse, and Mrs. Doyle told her crying was exactly what kids do when they want to manipulate adults. Another child came in for a Band-Aid, saw Mia's face, and asked if she was okay. Mrs. Doyle waved the kid out and told her to mind her own business. Mia tried to reach for the EpiPen on the desk, and Mrs. Doyle slid it into a drawer. "I decide when that's needed. That's my job, not yours." 5 minutes later, Mia's teacher, Ms. Rivers, came down because the class had told her about the trail mix. Mrs. Doyle stood in the doorway and said, "She's fine. She's just stalling. There's a math test next period and she knows it." Ms. Rivers tried to look past her at Mia, who by then had hives crawling up her neck, and asked about the EpiPen. Mrs. Doyle waved her off and said every parent in this district thinks their kid is dying every time they sneeze. Ms. Rivers went back to her classroom because teachers had been told for years not to override the nurse on medical calls. Mia slumped against the wall. 10 more minutes passed. A custodian walked by the open door, saw Mia turning a strange color, and asked Mrs. Doyle if she had called anyone. Mrs. Doyle told him she didn't appreciate the janitor weighing in on medical decisions. He stood there for a second and then walked off, and a minute later Ms. Rivers came back, this time with the assistant principal, Michaela. Michaela took one look at Mia, who was barely sitting upright, and demanded to know why her EpiPen hadn't been administered. Mrs. Doyle started to say something about kids these days, and Michaela cut her off, opened the drawer, grabbed the EpiPen, and pressed it into Mia's thigh herself. She told Ms. Rivers to call 911 and call me. By the time I got there, the ambulance was already pulling out of the parking lot with my daughter in it. At the hospital, the ER doctor was the one who told me what had actually happened. Mia had gone into full anaphylaxis. Her blood pressure had dropped so low she had been minutes from cardiac arrest when the EpiPen finally hit her system. The doctor asked, very carefully, how long she had been symptomatic before treatment. I told him 35 to 40 minutes. He set down his clipboard and said, "Anaphylaxis that goes untreated for that long is fatal in most children her size." He said it twice. "Your daughter got lucky." I sat in the chair next to her bed all night while she slept with an IV in her arm, and I listened to her oxygen monitor beep, and I kept thinking about how Mrs. Doyle had put the EpiPen in a drawer because she didn't want a kid getting out of a math test. I didn't sleep. Around 4 in the morning, Mia opened her eyes for a second, saw me, and asked if she was in trouble for missing her math test. I told her no. I told her she had done everything right. The next morning, I walked into the school's front office with the hospital discharge papers, the ER doctor's written summary, and the printed allergy action plan the school had signed since Mia was 5. Mrs. Doyle was at her desk in the nurse's office eating yogurt. She looked up and said, "Oh, is Mia feeling better?" I told her it would pass. I placed the discharge papers on her desk. I asked her what the phrase, "minutes from cardiac arrest," meant to her professionally. She started to say she had made a judgment call, and I asked her where on her nursing license it said she was qualified to overrule an allergy action plan signed by a pediatric allergist. Her face changed. The principal, Kalani, walked down the hall, and I asked her, loud enough for the front office to hear, whether the district was aware the school nurse had withheld emergency medication from a child in anaphylactic shock for over half an hour because she suspected the child was lying about a math test. Kalani asked if we could talk in her office. I said we could talk right here, because every parent walking their kid into this building deserved to know what had nearly happened in this room yesterday. Her hand settled on my shoulder, gentle but firm. "You're clearly distraught. Let's not make accusations in a public hallway about a nurse with a 20-year record." I looked her right in the face. "The only thing I'm making is a promise. I'm not leaving this building until I have a written statement, and if I don't get one, the next conversation is with a lawyer and the state nursing board." Kaylani's smile got tight. She thought she could manage me the way she managed PTA, complaints about parking lot traffic. I wasn't distraught. I was organized. I planted my feet and turned to the receptionist. "Can you please page Ms. Rivers?" Kaylani stepped forward. "That's not necessary. She's teaching." I looked right at her. "My daughter's school day was disrupted when your nurse hid her medication. Ms. Rivers can spare a few minutes." The receptionist picked up the phone before Kalani could finish. 3 minutes later, Ms. Rivers came around the corner, walking fast, and her hands went straight to her lanyard the second she saw me standing in the hallway with Kalani beside me. I didn't wait. "Ms. Rivers, you came to check on Mia yesterday. You saw the hives. You asked about the EpiPen. What did Mrs. Doyle tell you?" Her eyes moved to Kalani. Kalani's posture was stiff, daring her. Ms. Rivers swallowed. "She told me Mia was stalling. She said it would pass." I nodded. I already knew. I needed to hear it out loud, in front of witnesses, in this hallway. "Why didn't you push harder? You saw the hives spreading. Why did you walk away?" Her voice started shaking. "We've been told for years that medical decisions go through the nurse. I didn't think I was allowed to override her. I've been sick about it ever since." From inside the office, Mrs. Doyle's voice called out, "Ms. Rivers is exaggerating. Mia's symptoms were mild. The hives were barely there. This is being blown out of proportion." I walked to the nurse's office door, opened my folder, and read directly from the ER summary. "Patient presented with severe angioedema, widespread urticaria, and hypotension consistent with anaphylactic shock. Onset estimated 35 to 40 minutes prior to epinephrine administration." I looked up. "Which part of that sounds like test anxiety to you, Mrs. Doyle?" Her jaw tightened. She stared at me a long second. Then she said, "I've treated hundreds of children. One bad day doesn't define my career." One bad day. That's what she called it. My daughter's face swelling shut, her blood pressure crashing, her body going limp on a cot while this woman ate yogurt at her desk the next morning. morning like nothing happened. One bad day. Kalani cleared her throat and said she needed to make a call. I followed her into her office and closed the door. The room smelled like coffee and printer toner. There were framed photos on the wall of school events, kids in matching t-shirts, staff holding up awards. It looked like a place where everything was fine all the time. I didn't sit. Kalani didn't either. I held her gaze. If you bury this, I won't just go to the superintendent. I'll go to every parent in this district, and I'll hand them the same documents I'm holding right now. The ER report, the allergy plan your school signed, the policy your nurse broke, all of it. And I'll let them decide for themselves whether their kids are safe in this building. Kalani stood behind her desk a long time, running through options, calculating what each one would cost her. Then she said very quietly, "Let me make some calls." I walked out into the parking lot and called Mick. He's an old friend from college who works in education law. I told him everything, fast, and he asked one question. "Has anyone mentioned an incident report?" I stood there and ran through every conversation since I'd walked into the building. Not the discharge papers, not the allergy plan, not Kalani's formal process, not Mrs. Doyle's 20 years, not the receptionist, nobody. An ambulance had come to the school. My daughter had been taken away on a stretcher, and nobody had written down a single word. There was no official record, no paper trail, nothing in the system that said Mia almost died in that nurse's office. "They're not just protecting her," I said. "They're erasing it." Mick told me the district required an incident report within 24 hours of any emergency medication administration, no exceptions. He told me to go back inside and ask for one, and not to sign anything before he saw it first. I walked back through the front doors. Kaylani was waiting near the counter, and her shoulders had relaxed. She smiled, warmer this time, the kind of smile someone practices in a mirror. She said the district had decided to place Mrs. Doyle on administrative leave pending a full review, and she slid a piece of paper across the counter. "This is just a standard acknowledgement form. It confirms the district has responded to your concern, and you're agreeing to let the internal process run its course. Routine." I picked it up. The top was what she described. The bottom, in smaller print, was wrapped in careful language designed to sound like nothing. "By signing this form, the parent acknowledges the district's response and agrees not to pursue external complaints, formal grievances with outside agencies, or legal action related to the incident while the internal review process is in progress." I read it twice to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Then I slid it back across the counter, unsigned. I didn't push it. I didn't crumple it. I just slid it back, smooth and calm, the same way she had slid it to me. The warmth left her face like someone had flipped a switch. "If you're not willing to cooperate with the process, the district may not be as accommodating going forward." I said, "Accommodating. My daughter almost died in your building, with your staff, and the most accommodating thing anyone here has done is try to hand me a piece of paper that takes away my rights. What exactly have you been accommodating about?" Her voice dropped lower, quieter. "I'm trying to help you here, but if you go outside this building with this, it becomes adversarial, and that's harder for everyone, including Mia." She knew exactly what she was doing when she said my daughter's name. She was telling me that if I pushed too hard, there would be consequences, and she was putting those consequences on my child. Not on herself, not on Mrs. Doyle, on Mia. I asked her for a copy of the incident report related to what happened to Mia yesterday. Her eyes moved left, just slightly, and then back to me. "The report is still being completed." "By who?" "Mrs. Doyle." I let it hang in the air for a second. "The person who caused the incident is the one writing the report about it, and it isn't done." A full day later. Kehlani didn't answer. She didn't try a new angle. She just sat there with her hands flat on the desk, and the silence said more than anything she could have told me. I left her office and walked down the side hallway to find Michaela. Her door was cracked. When she saw it was me, she stood up and closed it behind me before I could say a word. She looked exhausted, the kind that sits behind your eyes when your brain won't stop running the same thing over and over. I sat down across from her. "Thank you for saving my daughter's life." She pressed her lips together and nodded once. I keep replaying it. I keep thinking about what would have happened if Mr. Rivers hadn't come to get me. If I had been in a meeting. Another 2 minutes and I don't think that EpiPen would have been enough. 2 minutes. The time it takes to walk from one end of a hallway to another. I asked her to tell me what she saw. She didn't rush. Mia was slumped sideways on the cot, not sitting. Slumped. Like her body didn't have the strength to hold itself up anymore. Her face was swollen so bad her eyes were almost shut. Her breathing was this thin, high whistle, like air being forced through a coffee straw. Her skin was mottled, patches of red and white, and a grayish color Michaela said she had never seen on a child before. Mrs. Doyle was at her desk, not standing over Mia, not monitoring her, sitting, and she said, "She doesn't need it. She's calming down." Mia's lips were turning blue. Her chest was barely moving. Michaela saw the EpiPen in the top drawer, slightly open, and she walked over and grabbed it. And then Mrs. Doyle came up behind her and grabbed her arm. Not tapped, not touched her shoulder. Grabbed, and said, "You are not a medical professional. Put that down." Michaela pulled her arm away and injected Mia anyway. She said Mia's leg barely reacted to the needle because she was so far gone she hardly flinched. And while Michaela was holding the EpiPen against my daughter's thigh, counting the seconds, Mrs. Doyle stood behind her and said, "If something goes wrong because you gave her that without my approval, that's on you." I felt something rise up in my chest that I don't have a word for. It wasn't anger. I had been angry since the hospital. This was past anger. Mrs. Doyle didn't just sit there and do nothing while my daughter was dying. She tried to stop someone else from saving her. And when Michaela did it anyway, Mrs. Doyle's first thought wasn't relief. It was to make sure someone else took the blame. I asked Michaela if she would put it in writing. She hesitated. She looked at her closed door like she could feel Kehlani on the other side of it. "Kehlani told me not to discuss this with anyone, especially not you. She said any communication with the family could compromise the process." I leaned forward. "Kehlani is trying to make this disappear. That's what the review is. That's what the form was. That's what the missing incident report is. If you stay quiet, she succeeds. And the next kid who walks in there with a swollen throat gets the same speech about faking it, except maybe next time there won't be someone like you walking through the door in time." Michaela stared at the wall behind me for a long time. Then she opened her desk drawer, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and laid it on the desk between us. I already wrote it, the night it happened. I sat at my kitchen table and wrote down everything I saw and everything that was said because I knew. I just didn't know who to give it to. It was handwritten in blue ink, both sides, neat and careful. At the top, top was the date and the time she started writing. At the bottom was her full name, her signature, and the time she finished. In between was everything. The slump on the cot, the whistle of her breathing, the mottled skin, Mrs. Doyle saying she didn't need the EpiPen, the grab, the exact words, the injection, and a clinical observation in plain language. Signs of cardiovascular collapse on arrival. This wasn't a complaint anymore. This wasn't a mom yelling in a hallway. This was a signed, dated, eyewitness statement from a school administrator describing a nurse who physically tried to prevent the use of life-saving medication on a child in anaphylactic shock. I called Mick from my car and read it to him. When I got to the part about Mrs. Doyle grabbing Michaela's arm, I heard him take a sharp